Today's episode is brought to you by We Break You Buy. Interested in sports cards and memorabilia? Check out We Break You Buy on TikTok. We Break You Buy is a small operation run by three brothers, offering spots for a chance at winning some incredible sports cards and memorabilia. That's We Break You Buy. Check it out today on TikTok. I'm your host, Patrick Darms.
And I'm your co-host, Tom Paradiso.
And we have a first-time guest joining the podcast. Tom Paradiso, welcome.
Thanks, Pat. It's great to be here. Long-time listener, first-time participant.
Yes, we're thrilled to have you. It's taken a bit of doing to get you on. I tried to get you on much earlier in the podcast's history, and you weren't sure, but I finally talked you into it.
It did take a little persuasion. I've been listening since the start, and you had mentioned pretty early on and offered to join, and I was hesitant. I'll say I'm a little nervous, so forgive me if I stutter on the pod today, but happy to be here talking about this film. It's one that I like a lot.
Well, Tom, we're excited to have you, and especially considering that you've been a long-time listener. It took 5 seasons to now feature you as a guest, so we're excited to have you here.
Thanks, Anton.
Yeah, Tom just wanted to make sure, all right, these guys are here to stay.
Yeah, just seeing if it's worth it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, as long as it sticks.
Exactly.
You need to wait at least 70 episodes.
Well, you've got, I think, unlimited source material here, so the intention is for a long run. So I think there's opportunity to come back. Also, you hit a couple that I would have loved to have been on pretty early, before the offer was available. So I wanted to wait for a good one, and I think today we've got one that's right up there.
We definitely do. Out of curiosity, which ones piqued your interest early?
So one pretty early on, Tron was one that I really enjoyed that episode and had wished I was on that one because I actually really, really liked that movie. And it was interesting pick, I thought, for pretty early on. I think that was season 1.
Mm-hmm.
But that one really stands out.
Well, you may be in luck, my friend, because one of the things that we are discussing doing for the Patreon is revisiting some of the season 1 episodes. So
nice. That's news. New news.
Yeah, that is
That'd
new
be fun.
news.
That'd be fun.
News flash. So yeah, that's probably one we will revisit.
We'll have to see what happens with its sequel, its further sequel.
I don't have high hopes. I don't think anyone else does either.
I don't think so.
The big thing there is they're not going to have Daft Punk to do the music. So what do you do?
If they could find the next Daft Punk, but I don't see anyone coming along to fill those shoes anytime soon. So they're already at a disadvantage.
No. It's like if you're Spielberg, what do you do to replace John Williams? Because he's in his 90s now. It's like, how do you fill those shoes? I don't know.
No, you retire.
Well, Anton, what movie are we going to talk about today?
We are talking about 1989's Batman.
The nostalgia wave is real here. This is one that we debated doing this early. We almost did this on the first season, if you remember, Anton.
I do remember.
But we opted to do The Dark Knight Rises instead, which is, I'm just going to say it, it's a lesser Batman movie than this. Because this was, if you're of a certain age, this was the Batman movie. This was the good Batman movie for a long time. Until the Nolan films came around, this was the gold standard.
Now, I would say it's not the best adaptation of Batman since the movie, because of course we do have the animated series, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But yes, I totally agree, Pat.
It's funny you say this was the good Batman, because that's exactly what we called it in my house when it came out. Because when this movie came out, there already was the earlier 1960s Batman, but being 9 years old, had no way of really knowing what else was out there. And this movie's announced in theaters, and then the smarter people in broadcasting realized they could capitalize on the old Batman and started showing it on TV. So my brother and I got all excited to see Batman on TV, and we're a little surprised when we saw Adam West running around in tights with terrible action
Very,
and special effects.
a very different Batman.
Yes, not the good one, not the good Batman.
No, it has its charms, but yeah, it's like watching. I mean, it literally it's just a completely different medium.
Yeah, my kids wouldn't even watch 5 minutes of it.
I was going to ask, have you ever showed the old show to your kids?
We put it on. It didn't last 5 minutes.
Nah, I wouldn't think so. No. But again, I highly, highly recommend the animated series to your kids. I think they'd like it. Anton, let's dig into this. Having witnessed his parents' brutal murder as a child, billionaire philanthropist Bruce Wayne fights crime in Gotham City disguised as Batman, a costumed hero who strikes fear into the hearts of villains. But when a deformed madman who calls himself the Joker seizes control of Gotham's criminal underworld, Batman must face his most ruthless nemesis ever while protecting both his identity and his love interest, photojournalist Vicky Vale. Batman was released on June 23rd, 1989 by Warner Brothers, directed by Tim Burton, screenplay by Sam Hamm and Warren Scarron, based on the DC comic by Bob Kane and Bill Finger, starring Jack Nicholson, Michael Keaton, Kim Basinger, Robert Wool, Michael Gough, and Billy D. Williams. The budget was $48 million. That's $116 million adjusted for inflation. And the box office was $411 million. That is $1.1 billion adjusted for inflation. Tom, we were getting into this already, but as this week's guest, why did you want to talk about Batman?
Well, of all I mean, it seems every movie that comes out these days is some sort of comic IP, either related or very specifically a remake of something we've already seen. And when this movie came out, I mean, we had before it, we had Superman, and that was kind of it. So for me, I know a lot of people now really grew up with Marvel starting in the early 2000s. You might have caught the X-Men wave or started with Iron Man with the real kickoff of the MCU. But for me, this was it. Like, this movie was huge when it came out. I was 9 years old. This is the first movie I remember really seeing advertisements for. It's the first movie I was really aware of and really wanted to go see. I didn't see it in the theaters, but couldn't wait for it to come out on video. And I had not seen it in a long time, but when you mentioned you were looking to do it on the pod, I thought, that one is really interesting and I should watch it again and see how it's held up, and look at it through a different lens from when it came out.
I'm a little bit younger than you, but I do remember the legacy of this film. I remember seeing advertisements for Batman Returns. That's some of my earliest pop culture movie memories. I remember seeing posters for it in the mall or in Blockbuster when I was with my mom. And of course, I watched the animated series as a little kid, and I had the Batman toys. I was a really big Batman film, and I saw this probably too young. I was probably 5 years old when I first saw this film on video, and it's it was dark, it was scary, it was intense. But to view it now, like you, I hadn't seen it in a while, and it was really interesting to revisit this in a critical lens.
It was dark, but that was cool, right? As a kid, all of our comic media was comic books and cartoons, and the cartoons were always, the word's escaping me, but they were always a little dumbed down, and they definitely weren't dark as this. And this was the first movie I was aware of being heavily marketed, and it was everywhere. And as a 9-year-old, you don't necessarily notice all that stuff, but the merch, the T-shirts, like getting a Batman T-shirt in 1989 was like the coolest piece of clothing you could have, and it was on my Christmas list for sure.
Anton, what's your memory of this film?
Big superhero fan. Listeners know this, and big comic book fan. So I watched this fairly early in my childhood along with the classic Superman, and I remember as a kid thinking that this was the coolest adaptation of Batman I had seen until the animated series. Again, can't harp on that enough. But at the same time, I read comics a lot as a kid. So it's interesting because there is a time period for Batman where it was a bit campy and goofy, especially when you think of all the villains that he had to face over the years. But this particular film really was a conscious decision to take on that darker tone, and it was so fun to be able to revisit this because I don't know what I was expecting. I remember enjoying it a lot as a kid. I was hoping not to be disappointed, and I was very satisfied watching it again. So I'm excited to dig in, as you said, Pat, with a more critical lens. But I was a big fan of this film growing up.
For sure. And I said it, this was the gold standard. It was the good Batman film. As a kid in the 90s, we had 4 Batman movies. I saw Batman Forever in the theater. That was my first theater Batman. I really loved it. I still have a soft spot for that movie. Batman and Robin, we all know what happened there. It set the genre back. Batman wouldn't recover for a while. But on the Abyss episode, Anton, we talked about what a seminal year 1989 was for film. Batman reigned supreme over that year. But it was a huge movie year for a lot of different reasons. Tom, you mentioned the merchandising. I had all the toys as far as I know. And this was one of, if not the first movie to really capitalize on merchandising. I would say probably Star Wars would be the first. But this movie kind of redefined a lot of that. But this is what else came out in 1989. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Lethal Weapon 2, Ghostbusters 2, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, License to Kill, When Harry Met Sally, Do the Right Thing, The Abyss, Roadhouse, that's for you, Anton, Dead Poets Society. That was all in the summer, and then later that fall, we got Back to the Future Part 2 and The Little Mermaid. Huge. And Batman reigned supreme over all of them. Or at least that's what I thought. I don't know if either of you picked this up in the research. It was not the highest grossing film of the year.
No, it was not.
It was in the United States, but not internationally.
Which one beat it? Indiana Jones?
Yeah, which I guess isn't surprising, but...
No. Interesting that that's internationally. I would expect kind of these days it would be the other way around, given the IP of Batman.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. Or I guess, is it possible that superheroes were just more of an American thing at this point? Possibly.
Hard to say, because I think at least in English speaking countries, and just kind of speaking from the fact that my folks were born and living in another country, they definitely still received like American comics and fairly popular.
Yeah, and then of course everything changed in the 90s and especially in the 2000s with the Marvel films. Despite the success, this film did have criticism directed towards it. It actually won an Academy Award for its art direction. And, we've been teasing this, but it was really not until the Nolan films came along where this was considered the best of the Batmans. And it is cited as being enormously influential on the movie industry in general. I have a quote here from Scott Mendelson of Salon.com. Quote, including the increasing importance of opening weekend box office receipts, the narrowing window between a film's debut and its video release that caused the demise of second-run movie theaters, the accelerated acquisition of pre-existing, pre-sold properties for film adaptations that can be readily leveraged for merchandising tie-ins, the primacy of PG-13 as the target rating for film producers, and more offbeat, non-traditional casting opportunities for genre films. At the time of release, this was the 6th highest grossing film of all time. That's how big it was.
Wow.
Yeah, this movie was enormous. It was the highest grossing film that Warner Brothers ever released up until that point. It was the highest grossing film of them for the entire decade of the 1980s. And again, we always do the inflation adjusted numbers, but this made over $1 billion in today's money. One of the biggest hits of its era. Gentlemen, any other memories of this before we get into the production history?
I wasn't going to cite a memory, but that quote is spot on, the one from Scott Mendelson, in numerous ways. I think the non-traditional casting aspect, they really zagged there, where I think, we might talk about it later on, but the director had specific people in mind for roles that maybe the studio would have preferred not be chosen. As well as the PG-13 aspect being the sweet spot to rake in as much cash as possible. And then the shortened window in theaters, I didn't see this in theaters. As a 9-year-old, I didn't go to the movies that often, or at least before I was 9. But I remember knowing when it was coming out on VHS and going to the West Coast Video, not Blockbuster, the local West Coast Video, to get it kind of that first weekend, to watch it right away, to catch up, because that felt like an eternity to a 9-year-old. From June to when it was like end of summer, early fall when it came out on video.
Yeah.
Which it felt like forever, given all the hype. So that, and all those things seem to be different from the prior however many years of movies.
No, you're right about that. This was one of the first films to come out on VHS relatively quickly after its theatrical run. I think really prior to this, when VHS really started to take off in the mid 80s, you had to wait about a year after the theatrical run before it would be available on video. And Batman compressed that time by about 6 months, which was, like to your point, that would have been a huge deal in 1989.
Yeah, it was. And speaking of memories, I had a memory I forgot. But in fourth grade, we watched this movie in school.
What?
And I remember seeing it in school in the fall of fourth grade.
Wow, that's a great teacher.
Yeah. Wow.
She was a great teacher. This and the other movie we saw in class, you're going to love this, Pat. Witness.
Wow.
Wow. What class was this?
That was, I don't remember what class specifically. I think we had the same teacher for every class, but she did fast forward through one specific part of Witness.
Right.
But
Okay.
we saw the rest of it.
That reminds me, this would have been ninth grade. Yeah. So, yeah, freshman year of high school, we were studying Shakespeare, and our English teacher showed us Shakespeare in Love, and she just did not realize that Gwyneth Paltrow is topless in that movie. And that scene starts, and she was like scrambling to find the remote control, and just like she couldn't get it to work right. And she's just like, oh, well.
It was that or unplug the TV, right?
Right. Oh, Witness. That's amazing. Witness and Batman in the same class.
And
That's
Batman.
wow. Oh, that's good. I was going to say something else, and I don't remember what it was now.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. This is great. I just remembered. Yeah, we haven't even talked about Tim Burton yet. We're like 20 minutes into this recording. We haven't mentioned Tim Burton's name other than he did direct this movie. This would have been, to your point, Tom, probably no studio's first choice to direct this. His resume up to this point was, very atypical of a filmmaker that would be chosen for this kind of film. And I think we're all glad that he directed this.
No, totally agree. And fair to say, Warner Brothers saw a bit of a track record for success for Mr. Tim Burton. So it'd be fair to say Batman was due for Tim because of his past success.
Definitely. Financially, it's not his biggest hit. Adjusted for inflation, I think Alice in Wonderland probably made more. But I would say creatively, this had to have been the biggest hit of his career, right?
This and the one with the guy with the scissors for the hands.
What movie's that?
I forget. It was like James Finger Scissors.
I would say either one of those two. But yeah, the success of this film really skyrocketed Burton to, one of the biggest names in Hollywood. And it allowed him to get into projects that he normally probably wouldn't have gotten financing for. And that's why one of the reasons why I'm grateful that he did this. Like, think about it. If it wasn't for the success of this film, we probably don't get The Nightmare Before Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's do the production history, Anton. You know what? Why don't you go first this time? I always do, and I feel guilty about that.
Well, don't feel guilty, Pat. Let's dive right into that production history.
I really don't, but thank you.
As far back as the late 1970s, spurred by the success of Superman, they had been trying to get this movie made. Producers Benjamin Melniker and Michael E. Uslan purchased the film rights of Batman from DC Comics on October 3rd, 1979. It was Uslan's wish to make the definitive, dark, serious version of Batman the way Bob Kane and Bill Finger had envisioned him in 1939, a creature of the night stalking criminals in the shadows. Richard Maibaum was approached to write a script with Guy Hamilton to direct, but the two turned down the offer. Shout out to both of them as Bond series veterans. And at one point, Hamilton was going to direct the original Superman movie, but it fell through for him. Both Columbia Pictures and United Artists both turned down Melniker and Uslan's pitch, as they preferred a movie that was similar to the campy 1960s TV show. Producers John Peters and Peter Guber, the co-owner of the Golden State Warriors, joined the project, and Melniker and Uslan became executive producers. The four felt it was best to pattern the film's development after that of Superman. And after Universal turned down their idea, they finally got Warner Brothers, the studio behind the Superman franchise, to accept their idea for the project. Tom Mankiewicz, another Bond veteran, completed a script in 1983 which went through at least 9 rewrites. And Warner Brothers originally intended on releasing the movie in 1985, but they could never find the right director. Now, Tim Burton was hired by the studio to direct based on the success of Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and Burton was initially not a comic book fan, but was impressed by the dark and serious tone of the graphic novels The Dark Knight Returns and The Killing Joke. Disliking Mankiewicz's script for being too campy, Burton approached Sam Hamm, a comic book fan, to write a new screenplay, which he completed in October 1986. Hamm decided not to use an origin story, feeling that flashbacks would be more suitable and that, quote, unlocking the mystery, end quote, would become part of the storyline. He reasoned, quote, you totally destroy your credibility if you show the literal process by which Bruce Wayne becomes Batman, end quote. Hamm included the character Vicky Vale in another of his own creation, Carl Grissom. Dick Grayson, who had been featured prominently in Mankiewicz's script, was relegated to a cameo role. He would later be written out of the movie altogether. And after Beetlejuice was released to much success, Warner Brothers finally gave the project the green light and pre-production began in April 1988. The casting of Michael Keaton as Batman caused an uproar among Batman fans. 50,000 protest letters sent to Warner Brothers offices. Now, Burton was pressured by Warner Brothers to cast an obvious action movie star, but Burton held firm in his belief of Keaton. Now, Keaton decided to perform Batman's voice at a lower register than when he was portraying Bruce Wayne, which became a hallmark of the film version of the character, with Christian Bale later using the same technique.
Sidebar, real quick. If Mankiewicz's script was too campy, it really makes you wonder, like, how campy is too campy? Because this movie's pretty campy.
I'd say Adam West campy was a bit campier than this.
Yes, that's correct.
It's all relative.
That's a good point. Shout out to Tom Mankiewicz. Mankiewicz was responsible for writing the Bond films Diamonds Are Forever, Live and Let Die, and Man with the Golden Gun.
Pretty high on the camp scale for JB.
Yeah. He's a character.
Well, we don't need to spend too much time on Sam Hamm, but he doesn't have the most beautiful writing resume of writers out there either.
What else did he do?
Not much. I think he's been an assistant, a co-writer on a few things, and the one Monkey Bone with Brendan Fraser is, I think,
and Chris Kattan.
Yeah, I don't even think that's going to get covered on this pod.
Is probably not. To his credit, though, I mean, it's really hard to get taken seriously when your name's Sam Hamm. Just saying. Back to the production of this film. The following actors were considered for the role of the Joker: Tim Curry, David Bowie, John Lithgow, Brad Dourif, Ray Liotta, and James Woods. I don't know if I believe all that. Ray Liotta would not have been a major star in 1989. But regardless, Jack Nicholson was always the studio's top choice for the obvious reasons. Nicholson had what was known as a, quote, off-the-clock agreement. His contract specified the number of hours he was entitled to have off each day from the time he left the set to the time he reported back to filming, as well as being off for Los Angeles Lakers home games. Nicholson demanded top billing. All of his scenes had to be shot in a 3-week block, but the schedule lapsed into 106 days. He reduced his standard $10 million salary to $6 million in exchange for a cut of the film's earnings, including merchandise. So get this. He got a payout in excess of $50 million, and biographer Mark Elliott reports that Nicholson may have earned as much as $90 million from the deal he got on this film. That is one of the all-time great baller moves by Jack Nicholson. Well done, Jack.
I have a quick question for you, Pat and Tom. Do you know who was also considered for the role of the Joker in the film?
I do.
I do too.
I deliberately left him off here because I wanted to talk about him.
Oh, okay. Well, we can carry on.
Yeah, we can talk about him right now if you want.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, very special character and actor that I'm sure everyone grew up watching. But of course, Robin Williams.
Yeah. What do we think of that? I think it would have been amazing.
Would have been very different, but I think it would have been pretty special.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree.
I'm sad because of, how Robin Williams' life ended, but I'm sad because he's been teased a couple times in Batman films. He sort of almost played the Joker here. He was considered for the Riddler, I think, in Batman Forever. And just looking back on it, it's a real shame that he never ended up in one of these films.
It's a really good question of what if. Not to say that he didn't end up doing some great things in 89 anyway. Of course, he was in Dead Poets Society, which was one of his all-time great films. But it would have been a different performance, and I'd like to think it would have been an amazing performance to have Robin Williams as the Joker.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it would have worked well. But ultimately, I think this worked out well for everybody, right? He got to be in Dead Poets Society. Nicholson got to be the Joker here. This movie generated $750 million in merchandise sales. Just this movie.
Does that include Sorry, does that include the NES and Sega Genesis release for Batman 89?
I'm not sure. I would think that it would.
Another
And
video game tie-in.
I was going to ask if that included the Bob the Goon action figure. I don't know. I don't know if he's on the agenda, but shout out to Tracy Walter as Bob the Goon.
I think that may have been part of Nicholson's deal too,
I
because
think it
Tracy
was.
Walter
I
was his
read that
friend,
as
right?
well. Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, from such classics as City Slickers, Young Guns 2, Repo Man. Quite the resume.
Veteran of the screen. Back to the production. Tim Burton chose Billy D. Williams to play Harvey Dent because he wanted to include the villain Two-Face in a future film using the concept of an African-American Two-Face for the black and white concept. Didn't work out for Billy D. Williams, unfortunately.
I don't know how that would have landed.
I mean, Billy D. Williams, he really thought this was going to lead to him playing Two-Face, which is, I mean, so did the studio. They had to buy him out of his contract later on. And then Kim Basinger, she was a last-minute replacement for Sean Young, who was injured in a horse riding accident just before filming was about to begin. Oh, Sean Young. You could do a whole podcast episode on her.
You could. She was
Yeah.
injured in a horse riding accident that was rehearsal for the film.
Oh, it would have been like a cut, like something in the script that never got filmed.
Something, yeah, riding a horse in the film, and I don't know if we're gonna spend a ton of time on it, but she really, really wanted to be in the sequel.
Yes, she did. Oh, we're going to talk about her when we cover Batman Returns. I can't wait to talk about her.
Yeah, talk about derailing a career. Sorry.
Yeah, no, she did. She didn't do herself any favors. Now, Burton went out of his way to hire visionary production designer Anton Furst, who had also designed the iconic black and gold logo for the movie that was used in all the promotional materials. Sidebar, this is probably one of the all-time greatest movie posters I can think of. It's iconic. And it's the best Batman logo of all time.
It's timeless. I still have the keychain.
It's incredible.
The same keychain from 1989.
I do agree that the yellow and black emblem is pretty iconic, but it was also originally from the comics.
I know, but I just mean the way this movie poster looks. It had the sort of lens flare, like the shininess to it.
Just, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Iconic.
I agree with that.
It is certainly the old logo, but it's like slightly darker colors. Brilliant. First, and the art department deliberately mixed clashing architectural styles to, quote, make Gotham City the ugliest and bleakest metropolis imaginable, end quote. The 1985 film Brazil was a noticeable influence on the film's production design, as both Burton and Furst studied it as a reference.
I was saying they did a good job because watching the film, I thought, yeah, walking those streets, I could probably get mugged there.
This movie looks amazing. The production design is some of the coolest of its era, for sure. Tom, I know you're a fan of the film Brazil. You can definitely see the influence of that on here.
Oh, for sure. And you can see the influence. And I think they even one-upped it.
Yeah. I mean, they certainly had a lot more money to work with.
Yeah.
Anton, where was this film shot?
Well, of course, we love to give a shout out to our dear friends at Pinewood Studios.
Indeed, this is a film shot in England from October 10th, 1988 to February 14th, 1989. 80 days of main shooting, 86 days of second unit shooting, 18 sound stages were used, 7 stages occupied, including the 51-acre backlot for the Gotham City set, one of the biggest ever built at the studio. The budget escalated from $30 million to $48 million. That's a huge amount. Sam Hamm was not allowed to perform rewrites during the 1988 writer's strike. So Warren Scarron, who had also worked on Burton's Beetlejuice, he did rewrites. Jonathan Gems and Charles McNohan rewrote the script during filming. Charles McNohan also worked on Brazil, I believe. Only Scarron received screenplay credit with Hamm. Burton insisted on hiring Danny Elfman to compose the score, thank goodness, having already worked with him on Pee-wee's Big Adventure and Beetlejuice. Producers Peters and Goober were initially skeptical, but they became convinced after hearing Elfman's main theme. It was the producer's idea to have Prince contribute songs for the soundtrack, an idea that Burton protested. Batman was one of the first films to spawn 2 soundtracks. One of them featured songs written by Prince, while the other showcased Elfman's score. Both were successful, and compilations of Elfman's opening credits were used in the title sequence for Batman, the animated series. And that is the production history for Batman. Quite a lot. Before we talk about why this film wasn't better, we're going to take a quick break and hear from one of our sponsors. Today's podcast is brought to you by Sprizzy. Looking to skyrocket your YouTube channel's growth? Meet Sprizzy, your video's ultimate matchmaker. Their tailored ad campaigns connect your content with viewers who are already looking for videos like yours. With Sprizzy, you're not just getting views, you're gaining subscribers who are genuinely interested in what you create. Are you ready to boost your reach? Visit Sprizzy.com today and let's launch your channel to new heights. Sprizzy, the smarter way to promote your YouTube channel. Gentlemen, it's time to talk about why wasn't it better. I would like to start with the storytelling. We mentioned the writer's strike. It really impacted this movie. Originally in the climax, the Joker was meant to kill Vicky Vale, sending Batman into a vengeful fury. John Peters reworked the climax without telling Burton, and he commissioned production designer Anton Furst to create a 38-foot tall model of the cathedral. This cost $100,000. The film was already over budget. Tim Burton disliked the idea. Having no clue how the scene would end, he asked, quote, "How were Jack Nicholson and Kim Basinger walking up this cathedral, and then halfway up, Jack turns around and says, 'Why am I walking up all these stairs? Where am I going? We'll talk about it when you get to the top.' I had to tell him that I didn't know," end quote. I think one of the weaknesses of this film is the final 20 minutes. I find it pretty lackluster.
In what sense, Pat? Is it the fact that it went a little bit too fast? Do we feel like maybe the Joker went out in a way that was unbefitting of Batman's top villain?
All of the above that you just stated. We see the bat plane gets shot down by a pistol. It looked like they were running out of money when the model plane crashes. And the conclusion to this movie, which is really exciting up until this point, is the Joker running up the stairs of a cathedral with Vicky Vale. Batman takes the stairs, which is outrageous to me. He's got grappling hooks and stuff like that. I just find the finale of this movie like TV quality. They run up to a cathedral. It's a obnoxiously tall cathedral. He basically like punches the Joker around. The Joker throws him and Vicky Vale off a ledge, and then a helicopter shows up, and that's kind of it.
Yeah, I agree with you. It definitely felt a bit rushed and lackluster. Another aspect I wanted to ask you both as well. What are your thoughts on having the Joker be the character that ended up murdering Bruce Wayne's parents, influencing him to eventually become the Batman?
Terrible.
Not necessary.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, someone that read the comics, there was a different weight to having the character for the longest time be an unnamed just criminal. But having it be the Joker just in this film and then having him go out the way it does, it just doesn't sit well from a storytelling standpoint. Feels just trivial.
Very contrived. Although I will say, whoever that actor is that played young Jack Nicholson, they really nailed the casting on that. Creepy looking dude.
I think they really missed an opportunity to bring the Joker back. Killing him off so quickly, that was and as a 9-year-old, there were not many things that I was disappointed in this movie, but that was one of them. It was kind of like, oh man, they killed him. He was so great. He can't come back.
The other thing too is he's kind of the main character of the movie.
Yeah.
He has more screen time than Batman, which is probably not what you want in a movie that's called Batman. Now, I understand this to some degree because Jack Nicholson had top billing. Jack Nicholson was earning more money of the two actors. Jack Nicholson was by far the bigger star of the two actors. But I have in my notes here, I wanted a little bit more Batman and a little bit less Joker.
So I kind of interpreted that a bit as continuing to build up how much of a bad guy the Joker was in the film. So whenever we did get a sighting of the Batman in the film, it added more weight to his scenes as a character. You kind of get that feeling of, oh snap, it's Batman. It's going to go down.
I suppose.
For me, the Joker was almost synonymous with Batman. I hadn't read a lot of the comic book before, being how young I was, and I thought of Batman as Batman and Joker. Like Joker's his main enemy, nemesis or enemy. And then they bring other ones in, like, oh, these are all minor characters. I want the Joker back. I didn't know the part that Vicky Vale was supposed to die. It's interesting to consider if Vicky Vale had died and they left the door wide open for a sequel with Batman versus Joker again. Not that Nicholson would have done it.
Probably not, no. I couldn't find information on why they changed it. I don't know, Anton, maybe you know something, but it just seems like the writer's strike derailed a lot of what they wanted to do with the second half of this movie.
Yeah, nothing that I could find, but that writer's strike definitely did a doozy on the last 20 minutes of the film.
So you agree with me, Anton?
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of the, like, even the parade where it's just like it ends up being like there's a bunch of giant balloons with like Smilex gas in it. It's like, okay, I guess.
The car chase with the Batmobile, the Batwing.
The
It got.
Batwing.
We can get pretty critical pretty quickly in the back half of the film.
Yeah, we can. I don't want to be too harsh on it, but I would like, I do think that just the finale of this film is where it falls flat. The other scene too. What do we think of the scene of the Joker and his gang vandalizing the art museum to the Prince song?
I don't know that you'll agree with me. As a 9-year-old, I loved it. Now I could take it or leave it. We didn't talk. I didn't chime in on the Prince soundtrack, which is very, very extra and not necessary to this film. But as part of the marketing and to appeal to a broader audience, I think that was its function and it worked well. So I think I know, Pat, what you're gonna say. I'm not sure, Anton, your take on it. But I'm okay with it.
I'm a pretty big Prince fan, so I do lean more towards really loving it. And I'm actually with the rewatch did find myself enjoying it a bit. And also when we consider the fact that Prince wrote the soundtrack, what, in 2 weeks? Pretty amazing stuff.
Something like that, yeah.
I had both soundtracks, and the Prince one got way more play on my mini boombox.
I
Then
too like Prince very much. This scene is horrible. It's idiotic. I'm probably going to downgrade the film a full letter grade just because of this scene.
It just feels too silly for you.
It's like if you're not ready for it, it's like watching a different film. It turns into like an MTV style scene. I don't think it fits in the film very well. I like the songs by themselves, but I think it dates the film in a very particular type of way and not in a very good way. And I can understand why they did it. You know, I was not surprised to learn that Burton didn't want it in the film and the producers insisted.
speaking of MTV, did you revisit Prince's music video for Party Man before doing this episode?
I did.
And
Um, it's dated in a
I did
particular
not
way.
expect a yes there.
The other one too, Bat Dance, which was like a #1 hit.
Yep, that was huge.
Yeah, big
Just
hit.
wow. I do want to give a shout out to Francis Bacon. He's one of my favorite artists, and he is the artist of the painting that which the Joker spares from being vandalized. He does a lot of like very bizarre looking abstract stuff. It was really cool to see one of his paintings in this film. I just wanted to give him a shout out. Anton, you're the comic book expert here. How do you feel about Batman killing people in this film?
I mean, if they're going for a darker tone, then they achieved it. This Batman felt to me more insane compared to other Batman that we read in the comics and very vengeful. And so, if they were really going for that dark tone, having a Batman that kills is definitely going to have people on the edge of their seats. But as a fan of the comic, that's just one of the hallmarks of Batman is that he doesn't kill. And it just made his character more interesting to me.
Did it bother you when you first saw this film?
I think I blocked out that he essentially killed the Joker when I was younger, but I remember seeing it now and thinking, "Wow, he definitely just straight up killed the Joker."
It didn't bother me when I saw it because this was my earliest Batman memory. I might have seen the 1960s TV show before I saw this film, but this was really certainly the first like big screen introduction to Batman. So I didn't really think anything of it at the time, but I certainly understand the criticism of it. And of course, I don't think he kills anyone on the animated series, does he?
No, he doesn't. And like I said, that is an essential part of Batman is that he doesn't kill. And even the source material that the movie drew from, The Killing Joke and The Dark Knight Returns, those are very dark takes of the Batman, a bit more geared towards adults, especially The Killing Joke and how the Joker just terrorizes the people around Batman's life. And even in those instances, Batman still doesn't kill. And this Joker was, of course, pretty terrible, but if any of the listeners go and read those comics, you'll see like it really takes a lot for Batman not to kill. And that was very well written in the comics.
Something the Nolan films did really well too is emphasize that.
Absolutely.
Poor Harvey Dent in this film. It's a complete waste of the character. Poor Billy D. Williams. Nothing to do. He's basically in what, 2 scenes?
Yeah.
The other characters too. I had forgotten how useless Commissioner Gordon is in these older movies.
That's a good point.
He might as well be made of cardboard. And again, that's something the Nolan movies did far better than this. Like, think about how complete of a character Gordon is in those films, actively participating in the plot. Whereas in this one, he's just kind of an old fat guy who's just showing up at places and doesn't do anything. He's just like, oh my God.
Yeah, it was 89's Batman felt like Tim Burton assumed people already knew Batman's origin and the people around him. Nolan defined Batman and the character's motivations for his trilogy.
Right. One of the things where I think the storytelling really falls short with the characters. So we just mentioned Harvey Dent has nothing to do. Commissioner Gordon has nothing to do. But for whatever reason, Alexander Knox, played by Robert Wall, he is fourth billed in this film. He's given far more to do. I don't understand it. It's not a good thing. Did he bribe someone? Did the studio owe him a favor? Like, why is his character so prominent in this film?
There's nothing in the comics about it, so
Was he in the comics, or is he a character made up for this film?
I don't remember him in the comics at all.
I had forgotten how many lines he actually has in this movie. Just like rewatching it the other day, I was like, oh no, what's going on?
He has a lot of zingers, or attempted zingers.
He does. It's good you said attempted, because a lot of it doesn't land. I can't figure out what they were trying to do with just making him like he really is like the fourth biggest character in the film, and it doesn't make sense to me. Think about all the screen time we could have gotten with Alfred, or Gordon, or Dent, or anyone else, anyone but this guy. It's nothing against the actor, but it's just not a very interesting character who gets a lot of screen time. Roger Ebert said about this film, quote, "Batman is a triumph of design over story, style over substance, a great-looking movie with a plot you can't care much about," end quote. I think it's fair what he's saying. None of these films are really known for their plots. Plot to this one, it's basically Batman and the Joker fighting over Vicky Vale, and like, oh, by the way, the Joker killed his parents. What a coincidence. According to Sam Hamm, Anton, it was Burton's idea to have the Joker murder Wayne's parents. He said, quote, "The writer's strike was going on, and Tim had the other writers do that. I also hold innocent to Alfred letting Vicky Vale into the Batcave. Fans were ticked off with that, and I agree. That would have been Alfred's last day of employment at Wayne Manor," end quote.
Oh, that's funny.
Is that not true to the comics at all, Anton? Is that like accurate?
It is not true to the comics, and also this was just a very interesting time to think about where could comic book nerds go to complain about how inaccurate these things were compared to the comics. In 1989, we didn't have a version of the internet in 1989, so
No.
there was maybe your local comic book fans had to congregate at a comic book shop and have their real life Reddit threads and conversations complaining about the film.
Well, we know that they were writing into DC Comics because when they cast Michael Keaton, they got like what 50,000 letters protesting.
I can only imagine someone's processing the mail at Warner Brothers and they open the note. Someone's complaining about Michael Keaton and they just immediately toss it in the trash because it's covered in Cheeto dust. Just want to say though, this is all also self-deprecating humor to my fellow comic book fans.
That's true. How many comics do you own, Anton?
Way too many.
Is there a number?
Oof.
Do you not want to admit this? We can edit this out.
No. I mean, I'm not. It's just kind of more like, okay, got to think about the catalog.
Oh,
And
you
I'll say
don't
this-
know? Okay.
Well, because I have my own collection. My wife has her collection. When we got married, they became our collection.
You combined. Smart.
Yeah.
So do you own more comics or Pokemon cards?
Ooh, probably Pokemon cards.
I love it.
Yeah.
Tom, what about you? More Pokemon cards or comics?
Probably actually more Pokemon cards through whatever property of what is my kids is my own. I have a box of
think all of
comic
them?
books. Yes, I have a box of comic books from the late 80s, early 90s that's sitting in a closet that I'll probably never get rid of, nor let my kids actually have them because they would probably just mess them up.
Did you keep them in pretty good condition, Tom?
I did read them, so I don't think they're in very good condition. I don't think there's any jewels in there.
God, I was gonna say.
No, I
Get
would
the-
get Wolverine, I would get Logan, I would get some Batmans here and there. So, it's probably fewer than 30. It's not that many.
Anton, you know the comics I own.
Yes.
It's weird. Tom, believe it or not, Marvel Comics used to have the rights to James Bond, and they did comic versions of For Your Eyes Only and Octopussy.
Well, you have the novelization of almost every movie you've done, so I would not be surprised that you would have a lot of James Bond comics if those existed.
Yeah, there's only, it's weird. There's like For Your Eyes Only, Octopussy, and then like not License to Kill. I think The Living Daylights or License to Kill. It's only like a handful of them, and I can't figure out why it's only a handful of them. But you're right about the novelizations. I have the novelization to this film, Batman, that we're talking about. It's pretty close to what the final film is. There's one major omission that I wanted to mention. And so at the end of this film, when the Joker's having his parade, one of the things I always wondered about is like, well, if the Joker's committing mass murder, where are all the cops? Because if you notice, there's no cops at the parade except for I think there's like Gordon and a handful of them show up at the cathedral at the end. But so the Joker ends up poisoning all the coffee at all the police precincts, which like neutralizes 90% of the force. And this was in the script, and Burton chose not to film it. I always found that interesting.
Do you think the film would have been better with it?
Probably not.
Yeah, so I agree with that.
Yeah, I was thinking about this like when I was writing the notes. I'm like, would this have improved anything? Probably not.
If they were out of funds for the movie, that's a easy one to cut, right?
Yeah. I think you can actually see on film the exact moment they run out of money. It's when the bat plane gets shot down by a pistol.
It was a really big pistol, though.
It was.
Bit all the way down his trouser leg, and then it collapsed. Later on, it collapsed. So
it's funny in the moment. I remember laughing at that as a kid, and like now you're just like, wait, what?
Yeah, there probably was an episode of Mythbusters that tested out grappling hooks and gargoyles, and I remember this film had me thinking as a kid, is this really possible?
Yeah, it's like, that's realistic. That would pull him down, probably. Man, when the Joker falls, it's one of the worst effects I've ever seen. Tom, you're right. It is like that shot in RoboCop when what's his name? Dick Jones.
I think that's the character's name. Yeah.
Yeah, Dick Jones. When he falls, oh my gosh.
Rewatching the RoboCop, it's actually the claymation or whatever they used is worse. It actually made the Joker falling look better.
His arms are somehow too long.
Yes, the proportions are comical.
I have a quote from Christopher Nolan about this movie. He said this in 2005 when he was comparing this film to Batman Begins. Nolan said, quote, Tim Burton's Batman came from a very visionary and idiosyncratic view of the character. It's a pretty fascinating movie, and it has its place in movie history. But they created an environment for Batman that was as exotic and extraordinary as Batman himself. That worked very well, but Burton has never had a film that portrayed him as an extraordinary figure amid a relatively ordinary and recognizable world. That was the thrill I've been seeking, end quote.
I think that could be said for multiple Tim Burton movies.
Yes. He doesn't really do realistic worlds very well.
No.
Not that he tries.
No, they're going to be exotic.
Yeah, it's kind of his thing.
Yeah. All right. Number 2 reason why this wasn't better. Let's talk about the acting. We're going to praise some of the acting here. Jack Nicholson's Joker is astounding. I understand that he's been overshadowed by Heath Ledger in more recent years. I understand he doesn't have the same menace that Heath Ledger's character does, but I think Nicholson is awesome in this movie. I really do. I think his performance is taken for granted at this point. Some people say it's Nicholson doing Nicholson. I kind of disagree. I actually think it's one of Jack Nicholson's best performances. I think he's an all-time great movie villain here. I absolutely love him in this movie.
Oh, 1,000,000% agree. And if people are saying this is Nicholson just being Nicholson, then maybe they haven't seen as many performances that they need to. Because this was a very nuanced Jack Nicholson. You just love his expressions.
He does all these little subtle things. Like you think about the bit, he goes big in a lot of scenes. That's true, but he does a lot of subtle things that crack me up. Before he becomes the Joker, when they're in Axis Chemicals, if you remember when Batman's like holding him up, and then Tracy Walter's character is holding Gordon hostage, and Batman has to lower him, and like Nicholson's just like side-eyeing him the whole time, and he's just like, nice outfit. It's so great. And then all the stuff when he confronts Bruce and Vicky in her apartment, and Bruce Wayne's telling him the story about the guy, like the friend of his that went crazy.
Yeah.
And Nicholson has this look on his face, like he has no idea where Bruce Wayne's going with the story, and he's like trying to agree with him. It just cracks me up.
The film then, of course, is just them one-upping each other's craziness.
He really scared me as a kid. I don't think I'm alone there. Like this movie, it was really intense to watch as like a 5 or a 6-year-old. And he was just to me, he was one of the iconic movie villains when I was a kid.
I think the makeup helped too with just making him look extra creepy. And I will say, I think I remember telling you, Pat, the Joker without the makeup on when he's in the museum really did freak me out as a kid.
It's great makeup. There's a YouTube video you can watch about it too, where they're talking about how hard it was to design the makeup, specifically to get his fake human looking makeup to come off on top of the white layer, and they really struggled to get the right shade of white, because if it was too white, it would be washed out on camera. And they really put a lot of thought into it, and it really holds up, 35 years later. When he confronts Carl Grissom, when he steps out of the elevator, it's like perfectly filmed.
Oh, yeah.
He's backlit, everything's dark, and his white face is gradually revealed as he approaches Grissom. This scene really scared me when I first saw it on video as a kid. You can't really see his face. You know something's wrong with his face, but you can't figure it out. And I would say, of the original 4 Batman movies, this is probably the only one that actually has anything like legitimately creepy.
Oh, of the first 4?
Yeah.
Maybe some in the second one, but that not nearly as creepy as that scene.
No.
I'm thinking specifically of Danny DeVito eating fish.
That might be creepy for a different reason.
Yeah.
Tom, I want to hear your thoughts on this. Like this really like unsettled me as a kid.
It was. There were a couple scenes in this film that were, like many Tim Burton films, were scary and seemingly out of place for what you think is targeted for a kid's movie. Your specific instance of when he first comes out, there's a scene where he kind of comes back to consciousness, wants to see his face, and then smashes the mirror, so something's up, but
Yeah.
you haven't seen anything yet, and then the reveal. That I remember that vividly as a kid. Also, much darker on VHS than
Yes.
HD, so that only added to it. A lot less purpley.
It was. He really nailed the laugh too. When he's confronting Grissom, and you can tell he's trying to keep it together, and he's like, "You set me up over a woman," and he yells, and he does like the little like giggle. It's so great. I think his performance is underrated. I really do.
I think especially too if you compare it to previous Joker performances, which I can really only think of Cesar Romero from the original campy series, very different. So Nicholson didn't really have a lot to work with other than the source material. And I feel like with that, he gave a very memorable performance. Fantastic.
Should have probably gotten nominated for an Oscar for this.
I read in some research that they did campaign to get
Yeah.
a nomination, but
They did.
comic book movies it wasn't happening.
No.
Mm-mm.
There's a lot of movies like that in the 80s. Like when you really think about Anton way back in season 1 when we talked about Superman 2, although we hated
Right.
that film, Terrence Stamp should have been nominated for playing General Zod. He's amazing in that movie. And then something else like Ricardo Montalban in Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan. You're like, well, how was he not nominated for an Oscar? It's just, Tom, you're right. It's just those kinds of movies, they just weren't recognized like that.
No, not considered for that type of reward or award.
No, Heath Ledger really changed that. Unfortunately, he didn't live to see it, but his performance, I think, changed a lot of the landscape on that. And then the other star of this movie, Batman himself, Michael Keaton, daringly offbeat. I really like him as Batman. I'm really grateful that he was chosen to play Batman. I understand he was certainly not a conventional choice for the role, but he's one of my favorite things about watching this film.
How would you describe Michael Keaton's performance? Was it, I mean, I know that you've mentioned the words offbeat. What was his energy like, especially even comparing to the next Bruce Waynes that we got in the 4 Batman films?
Well, building off what I said about offbeat, he comes across as certainly like a weirdo, which I think is appropriate for the character. He comes across as someone who is a loner. I just like all of his beats that he does. He always does these little pauses before he answers people. It's just not, I guess until that point you were thinking of like, well, we have Christopher Reeve as Superman. Like he's the only real standard for a superhero we have. It's hard to describe, Anton, how I feel about it, but I know you like him too. Like, how would you say?
I would say that very similarly, this film was able to capture how unhinged Batman is, because it takes a very unhinged and disturbed individual to base his whole persona on taking down the criminals of the night while dressed as a bat. And you get that so much in this performance where, yes, he's very effective in taking out criminals and knows his craft and using his wealth to fund his, what is it, side hustle. But this is a very unhinged Batman. And I really think that the scene that captures that, of course, is, what is it, takes the fire poker and smashes it against a vase and is ready to get nuts.
Well, you have to understand, Anton, you never rub another man's rhubarb.
Yeah, they're a very well lesson learned.
Yeah.
But it was super fun though. I know, Pat, I don't think you're ever gonna watch it. Tom, did you see what was it, the Flash film that came out not too long ago?
So I was just asking Pat about that earlier. I think I saw it. That's
With Michael Keaton.
yes, with Michael
Yeah.
Keaton. I have memories of too many scenes to have not seen it, but I can't remember if I saw it on. And I know it only came out less than a year ago, but either I watched it on a plane or in a hotel on vacation when I was falling asleep.
Yeah, there was no real reason for Michael Keaton to be in the film other than they really wanted to do a multiverse project. Terrible film, like one of the worst films I've ever seen. I have no idea how they convinced critics to give it such great reviews before the film finally dropped. But Michael Keaton was the highlight of the film, and I think that the directors knew that.
Well, the marketing department knew that too because they were marketing it as a Batman movie, which was a instant red flag.
Yeah, especially if that is something that's supposed to really draw people in. You do get a majority of the awesome highlight scenes that they ended up having in the film in the trailer. So a lot of reasons why that film didn't do well, but I don't think anyone really expected it to do great.
I think Keaton he leaned into Batman being unhinged in a good way. One, if he hadn't, I mean, the Joker would have overwhelmed the movie even more. But also without the luxury of having his whole backstory told to us, he has to exaggerate it a little bit to get to that point of even seeming a little bit unhinged. And even smaller things like hanging from the gravity boots after a
Yes.
night with Vicky Vale. It's like, this guy's weird. He's something off with him.
Yeah, and the way that they portray the characters together with Batman and the Joker, Joker is the foil to the Batman, and Batman is, they say this in the comics a lot, Batman is one bad day away from going down the path the Joker did. It's just the Joker broke, and that's why he's the way he is. And the Batman is constantly fighting against succumbing to that level of depravity. But don't let it fool you, he is unhinged. He just can handle it better. And he's using his trauma and he's using his experiences to do better for the city. So I think when you think of even from that sense, having these two characters really pitted against each other is the key hero and villain storyline. So it is disappointing to have him die at the end of the film.
Yeah, I think you're right. They shouldn't have killed him off. Back to Keaton really quick. I finally just thought of a way to articulate what I was trying to say earlier, Anton.
Mm-hmm.
Keaton got the balance right, which is necessary for the character. And this is something that not everybody who plays Bruce Wayne is able to balance correctly. An actor who plays Batman has to also play Bruce Wayne, right? You're essentially playing two characters. So he was able to successfully pull off this on screen. I, as a viewer, need to be able to believe that this guy is enough of a weirdo that he dresses up as a bat to fight crime in the middle of the night. He's tortured, right? Basically has all kinds of psychological issues that would lead him to do that. But I also need to be able to believe that this person is the head of a corporation and is a billionaire and can charm people. Keaton is able to pull that off here very well. This is low-hanging fruit, but George Clooney was not able to pull that off. Like, he can pull off the Playboy side of it, but at no point during Batman and Robin are you able to believe, like, yeah, this guy's a complete weirdo. Like, Clooney's not the actor to do that. Christian Bale was able to do that. What's the guy who played Batman in The Batman? Robert Pattinson?
Yeah.
I like that movie. I like things about that movie. He got the weirdo side of it, but the Playboy side of it, I never bought it with him.
So I actually really like that depiction because it's a very young and experienced Batman. And this is something from the comics, Batman struggling to pretend to be Bruce Wayne.
Right. I understand there are different interpretations of the character, right? But I think for cinematic Batman, I think a successful actor who does this role needs to be able to do both of those roles convincingly.
Yeah,
Keaton does. That's why I like Keaton's performance here a lot.
Yeah, and if that's the story and the way that the director is trying to, tell it, I totally agree. And I think that was what they were trying to tell in this film.
There's only one weakness to his performance, in my opinion. It's not necessarily his fault. I think he was physically limited by the suit. You could tell that suit was very restrictive in his movements.
Oh yeah, he could not turn his head left with that cowl.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily want to hold that against Keaton, but it is something that I noticed on the rewatch. I was like, wow, he can't. It's clear like he can't really throw a punch that well. The action sequences, they're pretty stiff. Also, Keaton looks like he's about 5'8". They didn't do a great job, I thought, of disguising that. When I think of Batman, he's like a giant dude. This is something I think the Christian Bale performance just nailed, where I can really believe that this guy is capable of just beating the living crap out of 20 guys in a room. You don't get that with Keaton. Like, even in the finale, when he's smacking the Joker around, you really get the sense like that's really stretching his physical limitations. It doesn't help that the Joker rips him and Vicky Vale off the roof with just two hands either. So, no.
I think what really showed that to me in the film as well is just how animated the Joker is compared to Batman. Definitely, you could see that their range of how they could even throw themselves around was very different.
I don't want to be too harsh on it. I think it's just part of the time, right? This was a 1989 production. They clearly just weren't putting a lot of money into like fight choreography. You could tell it was probably a lot of improv on set.
Do we want to say that and then have a listener come in and say, well, I can list all of these films with great fight choreography from 1989?
Oh, I'm not disputing that necessarily. I'm just talking this particular movie. I just don't think they did it. We can bring up Bloodsport. We can talk about Bloodsport.
I was going to say we can bring up Roadhouse, 1989.
Your favorite. Did you like the remake?
I did not.
I didn't see it. Tom, did you see it?
I did watch it. It's nothing like
Good?
It's nothing like the original. It's not terrible, but it's not good.
It's literally nothing like the original. But
is it
maybe
worth watching? Because I like Jake Gyllenhaal.
I don't think I'll ever watch it again.
Yeah, I think you're fine not watching it.
That's what I thought.
It jumped the shark, almost literally.
Oh boy! Even with Conor McGregor in it.
Even with, partially because of.
I was going to say McGregor was the shark.
Yeah,
I could see that. Maybe one day. Well, what do we think of Kim Basinger, Vicky Vale?
I thought she was fine. Even in the comics, Vicky Vale isn't that important of a character, and if the point of her character was just to, push the stakes a bit, she did her job, but I thought it was fine. Not my favorite female lead in a superhero film.
The majority of her lines were just screams, right?
Pretty much.
I actually have a memory of watching this movie at home and being told to turn it down by my mom because there was so much screaming coming from the room. We're watching TV. She's like, "What are you watching? Turn it down." All I hear is screaming.
She's better than Sean Young, I can tell you that. We dodged a bullet there.
I mean, especially if you compare female lead to a female lead in the next Batman film. I mean, Michelle Pfeiffer.
Oh yeah.
Kills it.
Amazing.
But maybe that's just the way that the character was written. Can't really blame Kim Basinger for that.
What if it had been Kelly Lynch?
From Roadhouse?
From Roadhouse.
Oh, man. I don't have a lot to say about the rest of the cast. I want to give a special shout out to Jack Palance, though. He's just really embraced playing a cartoon character. I used to quote this to my family all the time. Remember, you are my number one God. His death scene's hilarious. When the Joker's confronting him, I don't know if you noticed this bit where he just he realizes what's going to happen to him and just downs his drink and then tries to get his gun.
Mm-hmm.
So great. The guy that plays Eckhart's terrible. It didn't seem like they had a lot of money left over once they paid Jack Nicholson and Michael Keaton. They were just like, well, whoever's available.
Funny enough, you think with all the character, I mean, it just always amazes me. Not a huge cast in the film, which is fine, but they really expand it as time goes on with each film. But all in all, like a pretty lean cast.
They expanded to a fault.
Oh, yeah.
Or it gets to the point where we have Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy and Bane. Ugh. Last reason why this wasn't better, let's talk about the production. Tom, you mentioned how dark this movie was in 1989, literally and figuratively. But by today's standards, not so much.
No. And in 1989, compared to the 60s version, it was black and white. compared to the Technicolor you were seeing in the 60s. Now, when you watch it, both probably because of the high def screens we all have, you can see, and because of the color that was there the whole time, you can see just how much color there is, and there's a lot.
Yeah, it really pops in 4K. It's a pretty visually impressive movie.
Yeah, and there's just this ever constant feeling of how murky or just how brooding it feels to be in Gotham. Very well done. Very brooding feeling throughout the scenes. And I don't know if it was just a shading on the shot or anything that they did in post, but they just really built that atmosphere perfectly.
I think it was deliberately shot that way by Roger Pratt. A lot of film noir influences, a lot of shadows, a lot of smoke, a lot of steam. They got all that right. And then Anton, your namesake, Anton First, the production design.
My namesake.
Yeah, your namesake. This movie deservedly won the Oscar for art direction. It's such an amazing looking movie. And like, yeah, I understand there's a lot of 1989 looking matte paintings and stuff that are being used, but the whole look of this film is probably the best thing about it. The Art Deco look to it. None of the sequels have this. Even the second one, which is also directed by Burton, it had a different production designer. Anton First's successors never matched him. I don't think any of the sequels look as cool as this movie looks.
Now, as much as I enjoyed this film, I love Batman the Animated Series. And especially when you see this film and how much the Art Deco inspired the first few seasons of that, it's pretty incredible. And not only visually, but in the tone. A lot of the storylines in the first season were just also felt like it was from a pulp novel.
Yeah.
And I think that that's just so great that they were able to really translate that in such a seamless way. And we're going to talk about it, but it also included the score by Danny Elfman. And one of the greatest things get graced upon us when it comes to film scores.
It's a masterpiece. Quick sidebar though, before I forget about it. I forgot how cool the opening credits are to this movie. I hadn't seen this movie in a while, and I was really impressed by the opening credits where it's just zooming through basically what ends up being the Batman logo. Very creative way to open a movie.
Agreed. It felt a little bit like the old HBO intro when you would kind of zoom around the O. I don't know if I'm dating myself.
Yeah, I know what you're
a
talking
lot,
about. Yeah.
but that it made me think of that seeing it. I'd forgotten about that as well.
Yeah, it's just stuff you don't see in movies nowadays. Come to think of it, most movies don't even have opening credits anymore. It's pretty uncommon at this point. But now, Anton, back to the score. Danny Elfman. It's a masterpiece. It's probably the best thing about the movie.
It's my favorite thing about the movie. And it's also kind of amazing when you listen to it. And just from a musical background, it's fairly simple. It's the same notes sequentially going up and then down. But at the same time, the way that they play it and then the overall score together, it just fits so hauntingly and beautifully. And just the way that it rises, it fits how atmospheric this is. And you do feel like, wow, this is Batman.
It is in the pantheon of all-time great film scores. It should be. Much like the John Williams Superman score, I don't think it's ever been matched. And as much as I like James Newton Howard's and Hans Zimmer's work on the Nolan films, I don't think they top this.
No, they do not. And also just amazing to, got to give credit to Mr. Oingo Boingo. He hadn't done a ton of film scores before this. I'm pretty sure he.
One thing about Elfman too, he had done Pee-wee and Beetlejuice. That's it.
Okay, got it.
That's why the producers were hesitant to hire him, right? Until they heard the theme, and then that they must have been like, "Oh, okay, this works." But one thing too about Elfman, this was before he got into the weird choral chanting thing that would become very common in his scores. It's not present in this film at all, and I'm appreciative of that fact. I don't know what either of you know what I'm talking about. A lot of his like later scores get that. Oh, not a fan. The tone of this movie, something else that the sequels I think lacked. This has like a black humor, tongue-in-cheek kind of vibe for it. When the newscasters are interacting with each other on screen, I found myself laughing. It really reminded me of RoboCop. And for whatever reason, this vibe never really carried over into any of the subsequent films.
I know what you mean. I got that same feeling. It felt part of the bleak tone, but like you said, black humor. And I think that just adds to the atmosphere that Tim Burton was creating, but you really didn't get that in Batman Returns.
No, especially the one scene. The best example of this is the very first scene where you see them on TV and they can't use any of the makeup because the Joker's been poisoning them, and they look like crap. It's just so funny.
They look hungover, like they had a rough
Yeah,
night.
it's so great. And there's a lot of great lines in this movie. We were saying a bunch of them. I mean, I still laugh when the Joker yells, "He stole my balloons." It's good stuff. Jack Nicholson is able to make some really bad lines passable.
Like Dancing with the Devil in the pale moonlight.
Yeah, like that could easily be horrible, and it just he sells it. No, I'm again never rub another man's rhubarb. It just cracks me up.
There were so many lines in this movie that I knew that I had to bite my tongue to not say them all right before each line, and mostly because there were so many kind of quippy one-liners, but also it's pretty catchy. A lot of dialogue.
It is.
Well, Tom, here's your opportunity. What are some of your favorite lines from the film?
Right off the bat, "I'm not going to kill you. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to tell all your friends about me." That was such a badass line for a 9-year-old.
Mhm.
Incredible way to open a movie.
Yeah, right from the jump. It's like, oh, right, here we go. And I don't remember that from any of the other Batman movies.
Excellent choice.
That, and have you ever heard of the healing power of laughter?
The way it's
He has
delivered.
so many quotes.
And it's hard to tell, like, did Jack Nicholson come up with them or were they in the script?
He does all these subtle things. Like, you remember early on when his character is introduced and Jerry Hall comes up to him and she's like, "You look fine." And he just turns around and he's like, "I didn't ask."
That was the next one. I wrote 3 down before this. The 2 I said, and the next one I wrote was just, "I didn't ask."
Yeah.
Decent people shouldn't live here.
Well, they put a lot of the sound clips into the Prince soundtrack,
Yes,
right?
they did.
So they were integrated into the songs. So if you knew the words of the songs, you knew a lot of his lines.
Did you guys
Where does
see
he get those wonderful toys?
Yep.
Great line.
Did you guys see the music video for Bat Dance?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot going on there.
Yes, there was. The editor earned his commission. Should we post that on Twitter, Anton, for all of our 12 Twitter followers?
You mean X?
Yeah, sorry. I can't get used to say. You know what? It's like HBO Max just becoming Max. I can't get used to it.
Yeah, it's still just Twitter.
Yeah. Shout out to Discovery Warner, who were like, "What if we took this platform called HBO Max that everybody liked and just gave it a shitty name?"
Yeah. Discovery Warner, can we have another good show on HBO, please?
Well, they don't have the budget for it. You know what else they didn't have the budget for? The special effects in this film. They are pretty laughable.
Yeah, the Joker falling scene one was... it looked
awful.
really awkward.
Okay, so normally we grade these things on a curve, right? Because you're like, oh, okay, well, it's an older film. They were limited by the technology of their day. But I was thinking about this a bit. Here are some films that also came out in 1989. The Abyss, Back to the Future Part 2, Ghostbusters 2, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. We mentioned this in the intro, right? All of these films came out at the same time and had far superior special effects. So the effects were bad in 1989 in this movie.
Yeah, relative to its peers at the time, there was definitely noticeably less effective special effects.
Yeah, although I do like a lot of the matte paintings. Like the opening shot of Gotham City, even though it looks very much like a matte painting, it is really cool.
Certain things, of course, still hold up, like the scenes of the Batmobile firing up.
That's true. Oh, but we can all agree this is the best Batmobile of all time, right?
Oh, yeah. I wanted
absolutely.
to mention that earlier.
Yeah. I don't even think it's close.
Batmobile, Batplane, Batarang.
And the voice control on the Batmobile, that was ahead of its time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That must have blown you away in 1989.
Just holding up the little mic shields.
His voice control in general, he was able to successfully do the lower voice thing without it sounding stupid like Christian Bale. Where's the trigger?
I'm not wearing hockey pants.
Oh, he does say that. Wait, was that in The Dark Knight?
Yeah.
This is to inoculate yourself. Okay, I'm done. Yeah, just once again, it's the best Batmobile of all time. I won't hear any other arguments.
We also got the return of the Batwing in that Flash movie, and that's going to be the last I say of that film on this podcast.
I'm very glad I've never seen it, and I don't intend to.
Yeah, Warner Brothers is going to make it that way. I don't think they're ever revisiting it.
Well, do either of you have anything to add before we wrap this up?
Go read more comics, kids. The more that we can continue to fund these writers and support them, then maybe we'll see more writers be able to influence the films that we see. in theaters by these big publishing or these big publishing studios. But other than that, you can see what happens when you don't have comic influence in these films.
It's true. Well, then, it's time to give our ratings. Tom, as the guest, would you like to go first?
Sure. Recap or ratings? Just go straight to my grading, or
Whatever you want. I mean,
Yeah.
most of the time we do a little summary and then
Yeah.
give your rating, but you don't have to. Whatever you want.
Maybe I want to zag. I mean, I feel like I don't know, have we eclipsed the runtime of the movie yet? We've been talking
No.
for a while.
No.
We haven't.
You know, when I was 9, I loved this movie. I couldn't wait for it to come out. I saw it, and we immediately, I don't remember if we bought it. I think we did buy it because I remember the cover at home of the VHS. But, had both soundtracks, had the movie, watched it again and again and again. Was really interested to see if it would hold up when I revisited it. And I watched it a few months ago, and then again, I watched it 2 times before we did today's pod. And surprisingly, the first time I rewatched it, I didn't think as highly of it as I did. And watching it a second and third time recently, it really grew on me and really started to appreciate what it is at, for when it was made and what the precedent they were setting, or at least the ground they were breaking. So I think pretty favorably of it. And if I'm to give my grade, it's solidly in the B range, and I'm leaning towards a B plus, which is higher than I would have said a few months ago.
Love it. Anton?
Batman in 1989 really was also paralleling a shift in how people perceived comic books. We mentioned earlier Dark Knight Returns and The Killing Joke really influencing how there could be more adult themes and a darker tone in comic books and to take them seriously. And this film is so influential in being able to have just the wider audience really look at comic book films with a different tone and with a different perspective. And so with that, I'll always have a ton of respect for this film. I mentioned before, I had a lot of fun revisiting this film, and I enjoyed it a lot as a kid. I think that a lot of the special effects don't really hold up as well, but that is a bit of the, I guess, kind of contained magic and just kind of the campiness that we get for a film from 1989. And while it's not perfect, it was still enjoyable and really held up by strong performances by both of our 2 main leads. We have fantastic source material, which don't really have to deviate too much. It's still a very engrossing story, if not too deep. And we have, of course, the greatest score of, I'd say, all time when it comes to comic book films. So it's not a perfect film, but especially if you try to put it up and compare it to comic book films today, it's very hard to compare. But this really did set the tone for what a comic book film could be. Now, I will say there were comic book films released before this. Of course, we talked about Superman, very different tone. And even before then, 1982, Swamp Thing. A lot of people don't really remember that film. I don't know if either of you remember this film, but that was a DC Comics film in 1982, which also felt like it was trying to be a little bit ahead of its time. But all I'm just trying to say is I really have to give respect for these early films that really allowed comic book films to sit at the status of being taken a bit more seriously. So I really enjoyed it. And for me, this film is a B minus.
I will always defend this film, even though I don't think it's great. This movie changed an industry, and this movie walked so that a lot of future movies could run. If we don't get this movie in 1989, if this movie didn't succeed, we probably wouldn't have gotten The Dark Knight or any of the superhero films that we have today, at least not in their current iteration. Maybe we would have gotten some form of them later, but I always try to put this in the context of what this film would have been like in 1989. And although I was only a year old and have no memory of this in 1989, I do remember the legacy of this film, and I do know how unique that it was for the time. There was nothing else like it at the time. There's a lot of stuff in here that's really dated. A lot of the special effects, they just don't hold up. I don't like a lot of the performances, the supporting performances. I think there were a lot of just cardboard cutout characters. I don't like what they did with Harvey Dent or Commissioner Gordon, but Jack Nicholson and Michael Keaton are amazing in this movie. I love the look of it, even though I don't like the effects. I like the out of time setting. Is it the 80s? Is it the 40s? What kind of Art Deco is this? It looks really cool. Danny Elfman's score is a masterpiece. Anton, I'm intrigued by what you said. Is this the greatest superhero film score of all time? It may be. I'd have to think about it, but you might be right. The plot is pretty weak, and the final 20 minutes of the movie pretty lackluster. You can see where the writer's strike really hurt them. But I still think it's the best of the core 4 Batman movies, right? This one and the ones from the 90s. I think this holds up the best. It did a lot for the superhero genre. And again, I don't think it's a great movie, but it is a classic for all of the reasons that we've been talking about. The best thing I can find to sum up this movie actually comes from Tim Burton himself. He said that the film was, quote, more of a cultural phenomenon than a great movie, end quote. My favorite legacy of this movie is that it gave us the excellent animated series, which ran from 92 to 95. It was a huge part of my childhood, and I will be always grateful for this film for that. Anton, I am where you are at a B minus. I was going to give it a C plus, but my dislike for the Prince songs in this film maybe is a bit too much. And this film was a lot of fun to rewatch. It's so quotable, and the 2 lead performances are so fun, and it looks so cool that I give it a B minus, just like you.
Well, we all gave it a B for Batman.
Yeah,
That's the campiest thing I've said.
it's fun. It's a fun movie. Well, that's it for Batman. Tom, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, Tom, such a pleasure. And thank you for all of your enthusiasm and your genuine love for Batman. It's great.
I'm available for the Roadhouse whenever it's scheduled.
Thank you.
The remake?
The original. Although I don't know if it necessarily qualifies.
One of the benefits of hosting your own podcast is that you can do whatever you want.
Well, the original Roadhouse wasn't received well in critically or box office wise. It really is more of a cult film nowadays.
It makes sense.
Maybe that'll be the next project, is a spin-off of the Why Wasn't It Better with the why was it a cult classic and not successful?
Well, you could there's so much you could do with that. Just to let you know, Tom, our current list is almost 700 films. So we have plenty to do.
Yeah, it's a lot of films.
So, adding one more, not a big deal. But that's it for Batman. Anton, what is next week? Is it the Time Machine, or is it Live and Let Die?
Next week, we are back to Bond with Live and Let Die.
Fantastic.
And then Time Machine, 2002?
1961, the original. Yeah. Both of them are on our list, though. We're eventually going to do the 2002 one.
I was not old enough to see the 1960s one in the theater, but I did see the 2002 one when it came out.
It's not great.
No.
Have you seen the original one, though? The 1960 one? It's pretty good.
No, probably worth a visit.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty cool. That's a listener request. And our guest for Live and Let Die will be Paul Kind.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
Another member of the band.
That's right. So we will see you next week when we talk about Live and Let Die. And until then, take care, everyone. Thanks for listening to Why Wasn't It Better? If you've made it this far, it's safe to assume that you like what you hear. If you have not already done so, please hit that subscribe button and become a follower wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. If you really like what you hear, you can contribute to our podcast monetarily and sign up for our Patreon. So whether you're commuting, chilling at home, or embarking on a nostalgia-fueled movie adventure, make Why Wasn't It Better your go-to podcast companion.